This is BBC Two, and time now for Newsnight with Evan Davis.
The whole right side of the building was on fire. The whole thing was engulfed in flames, and you can hear people screaming, "Help me, help me, help me."
One of the firemen said, "Get back up to your flat," and his wife said no, and she just ran out.
It went up way quicker than it should do.
There's mothers that have come out and lost their children.
That cladding seemed to burn like paper.
You can see the fire going into the house and into the last room that they're in.
There's people who were jumping out of the place. There's a man who threw 2 of his children.
The block of flats had just been covered in cladding, and it looked like plastic.
Why did the escape routes get so quickly fire clogged?
Every floor was just like bang, bang. I could see people screaming up at the windows, banging, "Get us out, get us out." Next thing, them windows are blowing up. And
any work that was done during the refurbishment was completed and signed off. And actually, that's our position, and that's what we'll be able to show as we go through this inquiry.
The poorest housing in one of the richest boroughs in the country. It's been a day of utter horror and disbelief at the fire in West London early this morning, known to have killed at the very least 12, and who knows how many more. The individual stories that have been told today of death and survival have been hard to bear. I suspect most of us had complacently thought we'd overcome the problem of huge-scale fires of this kind through building codes and regulations, alarms and fire drills. We'll discuss some specific lessons later, but Newsnight has found that the cladding used in the renovation of the building was of a type that is less fire retardant than some others, and it has been associated with fires elsewhere. More on that later, but the fact is that this fire occurred in a building occupied by the relatively poor. Is this a case where the well-to-do in positions of power didn't care enough about the lives of the less well-off because they don't live in those blocks? Or was it ghastly, unfortunate accident? The potential that it is willful carelessness of those in power plays into the divisions and debates that this country has been having. Well, there's a lot to discuss, but we will start at the scene, and Emily is there, in fact, has been there all day. Emily.
Well, 20 hours on, that fire is still burning in the building behind me. You can see perhaps the 20th, 21st, 24th floors still ablaze, a beacon of orange in this night sky now. But yes, this is my borough, this is where I live, and I guess for many of us the first instinct was to try and to muck in. We've been sorting through some of the donations that have been coming to the various churches here, the Westway Sports Centre where the local kids play football, and that incidentally includes the Beckham kids, the Cameron kids, has become the community hub now. The Rugby Portobello Trust is where I've just come from. That has now played a pivotal role in rehousing all the Grenfell residents into local hotels for the night. They've had more than 200 people coming through their door today, and they've rehoused all bar around 40. Those 40 are missing relatives and wanted to stay a little bit closer to home. There's a large Muslim community in Grenfell Towers, and we have seen preparations now for Ramadan, the breaking of the fast, as I speak. One local pizzeria is handing out free pizza, which is being dropped off by local residents to some of those hotels. This has been a day powered by volunteers, and it has been an extraordinary response from the community. It's been quite overwhelming. That Rugby Portobello said they've had hundreds of calls of people offering spare rooms for the night to try and house residents. The donations have covered all ends of the culinary spectrum, everything from KFC to Dalesford Organic. You can see some of the fire trucks perhaps still trying to get through to that scene behind me. And there have been surreal elements to the day too, to be frank. I've been sorting through bags of mismatched socks and £500 designer Stella McCartney jeans and those free wash bags that airlines sometimes give out in business class. So that perhaps takes you to the heart of what you were just talking about, Evan, what you describe as sort of resounding thump of inequality which exists right here in this borough. It has never felt more stark than on a day like today. The image that we were all left with was 24 floors of London's poorest burning in their homes in one of the wealthiest places on earth. And already, even when the tragedy is barely a day old, there is an ill-concealed anger that something like this could happen right here in 2017. Our first report tonight comes from David Grossman.
The first call to the fire brigade was just before 1. Jody Martin was there as the first engine arrived. He and his friends filmed what they saw.
When I got there, one fire engine was just arriving and they were unloading their stuff. I grabbed an axe from the back. I could see people in there. I could see the flames on the other side. I went into the second floor for a bridge and then went through an apartment into the corridors. There's an elderly couple in there. I helped them out. It was very, very smoky on the second floor. And as I was coming out, the fire brigade are coming up through the main entrance.
George Clark is an architect and TV presenter. He lives 50 yards from the tower and was woken just after 1.
I looked out the door and I honestly couldn't believe what I saw. All the way to the top was on fire on that corner. I'm assuming the fire had started around the other side, the side that I couldn't see, which would be the east side of the tower.
Sheets and sheets of cladding and stuff just falling down on fire. And then I walked around and I was just screaming at people, get out now.
I've never seen a fire spread that quickly in a building in my life. But the biggest problem was the outside. That building was reclad last summer in 2016. They spent £10 million on it. I don't care what anyone says, there's no way that fire should spread that quickly on a newly refurbished building. I saw those cladding panels, the cladding on the outside and the insulation was just peeling off like you'd peel a banana.
And it was burning?
It's burning, it's fully on fire. I could see the flames behind. There's a new cladding system being put on the outside of the building, so like a new skin, and obviously there's an air gap and insulation behind that. To me, it just looked like that was a fantastic chimney for the fire to rage around.
And we were hearing the people screaming. You could see a lady holding her baby out the window, her toddler out the window. Specifically that second from the top flat, so the top one and then one flat underneath that. I could see a family of 3 in there, and I just got the smoke just got worse and worse, and they weren't going anywhere. They were flashing, and then they're just not there anymore. So I don't know what happened there. My partner saw someone jump, and over that side, I know that just from what the officers are doing, the fire officers, that someone had jumped, and I didn't see them jump, but I'd seen the aftermath, and they had landed on a fire officer.
I saw people hanging out the windows. There was a woman on the 14th floor banging something against the outside of the building, screaming at me to get her out. One guy caught a kid. Kid was thrown out of a window from like the 8th floor, and a guy just caught him. It's amazing.
Really?
Yes.
You saw that?
Yeah. It's just unbelievable, you know.
Francis Dean has been looking for his sister Zainab since 2 a.m. She called him from inside the tower. He raced over in his car.
When I got here, I sort of felt like, whoa, this is big, you know, and I phone her again. I said, Zainab, you need to come out of the building, use the stairs, go down the stairs. She tried as much as she can. She said it was smoky. I said, don't worry about the smoke, it's just smoke, just go down, use the stairs. I don't think she did, because she was nervous. She got a little son who was about 2.5 years old to 3, and it's really painful to imagine, because somebody who was with yesterday, and today now, where is she?
Many witnesses told us that people were being told to stay put in their flats, not risk leaving the building. Some undoubtedly owe their survival to not hearing this advice.
I just grabbed my children, my husband, and we just ran through the fire exit stairs. We saw a woman who jumped. We saw people put in bed sheets trying to get down, and police telling them not to. It's just everybody was panicking. It was chaotic.
He's sitting over there, that guy there, on the right-hand side. He's just spent 8 hours in that building. And the look in his eyes, hell. The stories that I've heard today from the guys who have been in that building, there's a lot of people who have died. And from what I saw watching it through the entire night and trying to help out, obviously I couldn't do anything. Anybody that was in that building above the 14th floor, I don't think they got out.
You know what would have helped is if there had been a fire alarm. So when I was in the building, it was dead silent. So I was shocked that there was no fire alarm, no sprinklers. I think people would have got out if there had been an alarm.
There are then plenty of questions both for the council and the tenant management organisation that ran the block on their behalf, particularly since fire safety was raised by residents on many occasions.
My understanding is that their concerns were looked at and officers in the TMO or the council made inquiries and felt that we had done what was necessary.
The government has now ordered a check on the fire safety of all similar blocks. The official death toll is now 12. Nobody expects it to stay there.
Well, one of the first people on the site at 3:30 this morning was Dr. Shata Hadran. She's a doctor and she joins me now along with Pilgrim Tucker from the Grenfell Action Group that you were hearing about then. Shata, if I start with you, you just saw the flames as you were driving back from Manchester. You said you saw them on the A40.
Yes, that's correct.
And what did you do?
Basically, I parked my car in Paddington and I had to walk all the way from Paddington because all roads were blocked. And when I reached the site, there were a lot of paramedics trying to help people to evacuate them from the building. They opened a lot of rescue centers, almost 6 or 7 rescue centers, but we only had like few nurses on site, and I was the only doctor on site until 10:30.
So what were you treating at that point?
The majority of cases were people with high or low blood pressure, diabetes, panic attack.
These were the people who had come out of the fire safely,
yes,
gone to the rescue centres, but yes, probably left without their medicine or their...
And basically they left everything behind, so we had to call some hospitals, and St. Charles Hospital was one of the first hospitals to respond, and they came in with medications and nurses, doctors, and they were really offering help. Then at 10:30, a lot of doctors, all voluntary doctors, they start flowing in the place. Voluntary admins, coordinators, everything was done on a voluntary basis.
Yeah, and you were still working when I found you at, 9:30 or so this evening?
I'm still working, actually.
You're going to go back to work now?
Yes, we still got some casualties that we need to take them for, like, evacuation centres and...
Pilgrim, we heard a little bit about Grenfell Action Group in the piece. It's been going now for, 7 years? So I know there's just... Inevitably, we will have the noise of the emergency services coming through. But just tell us what its goal was when it first started, what you've been trying to do.
Its goal was, so I worked with the Grenfell Action Group and residents from Grenfell Tower over a period of many months, mainly during the summer of 2015. They wanted to get their voices and their concerns about the building heard. They were really worried about the potential fire hazards here. There were boilers being put in by the contractors. Blocking doorways was the proposal. So I worked with them to help them get organised.
Were the contractors asking residents for their input?
The contractors and the tenant management organisation said they'd done a consultation. The consultation was rubbish. They had designed a show flats and shown the tenants the show flats. When the work started happening in the flats, the actual residents' properties, it was nothing like it was in the show flat. The residents asked the TMO to listen to them. They wrote to senior managers in the TMO. The TMO didn't respond. I wrote to them on behalf of the organisation and the residents, and they didn't respond to us. Meanwhile, the residents knew the only time the residents started to get listened to was when they shut their doors, put signs on the doors, refusing the contractors access to their flats, and protested outside the housing management office.
And I think
they signed petitions.
We're going to hear, hopefully in the coming days, from the TMO, from the contractors. These are allegations, and obviously we will give them the right to respond to this. But your sense tonight, you have got members of your own group missing, is that right, in the building?
Yes, there's women who I've tried to call today and their phones are dead, and from what I understand they've not been identified or found yet.
A lot of people will have read today the piece that was written in 2016 predicting loss of life. Just explain to us what you meant by that piece.
Ed, the guy who wrote that piece, was very, very aware, not professional, but it was obvious that the standard of works was really, really shoddy and really, really poor. Boilers in front of front doors, pipework sticking out inches outside of the walls. There were power surges that weren't looked into, where the lights in the building went dead, and the emergency lighting didn't come on. And these residents asked again and again and again, and they were threatened with legal action when they said that they wanted this work to take place. You know, and you've got a cost-cutting council that isn't listening to its residents. It's a privatised organisation, and you've got a big building company, Ryden, that is getting a lot of money from a lot of contracts across London and doing shoddy work. And it's not just here, it's in other parts of London as well. And it's very distressing. And like you said, this is a very unequal area. These are poor residents, or they're ordinary residents. They're not the wealthy, they're not the Camerons. They can't afford private schools, they can't afford lawyers. They tried to get lawyers, but because of the legal aid cuts, they couldn't get lawyers.
Welcome. We are going to be putting all those allegations and all the points you raise over the coming days to the parties at which you point the finger. So thank you very much for that. A last thought
Can
to
I just raise one more important thing? We received a lot of calls of people, they're asking about their family. Our main concern is first to give full medical treatment for people on the rescue centre and people in the hospitals. People, please, who are asking for their families, the right people to talk to are the Casualty Bureau and...
through the police.
Through the police, because they will have the full information. Each centre, they have a list. But also we got, some people, once they said our family is missing, saying missing, it doesn't mean that they're dead. They could be in a hospital, they could be a rescue centre.
You're with relatives who have still got missing people, and what are you saying to them?
Well, we had some missing people in the morning, we found them now, because a lot of people, when they left that building, I got a man separated from his wife, I got family, mother separated from their kids, but they found them. Because some of them, they went on that direction, some of them on the other direction. We got 6 rescue centres, we got more than 8 hospitals, they got casualties. So it's just a matter of time until we found them.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us that note of help. I really appreciate that. Thank you both very much indeed. Well, as you've been hearing, there have been frantic searches by frantic relatives who have been on site all day, anxious to hear news of any kind about those they can't find. Katie Razzle has been following one man through the day as he went in search of his relatives who lived within the tower.
He said, I'm in the building, I cannot leave because of the smoke. We're not leaving. That's what he said.
The waiting is torture. Chris Jones's brother-in-law lives with his wife and 3 children on the 21st floor of Grenfell Tower. Mr. Jones spoke to his relatives as the fire was spreading, and with his wife and son drove here in the early hours of the morning.
We phoned back, the phone just kept ringing. No one answered the phone. So we phoned his son, no answer, his phone was ringing. For them to be stuck in that situation, it's going to be difficult. Just a family in one flat, in one place, is difficult because they're going to have to make life-changing decisions. I'm hoping, in my mind, that there's families in there that they keep close to the floor and that there'll be enough air to go around the place, but I don't know.
Chris had other relatives in the block too, another brother and sister-in-law on the 9th floor.
She was on the lower floors, no problem with the lower floors, they got out. It's the upper floors that have the problem. I was there about 2:30. Within 20 minutes of that, the whole estate was engulfed, the whole of it. And obviously, saying I got a lot of hope, but I thought to myself, my God, how are they going to get out? We were just hoping.
Hours and hours of waiting. His wife inside the centre for worried families, Chris in the car outside, needing news of any kind.
At 1 o'clock, at least 6 people have died following a huge fire which engulfed a tower block in West London.
This doesn't look good. 6 people, that would be very, very... you'd be very lucky if just 6 people did. We expect it to be worse, and it will be worse.
How's the family bearing up, your family?
Well, they're coping. My head's going to have to roll somewhere. Somewhere has to roll.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, you know, the management of a block so big, they should have fire extinguishers in it. Not only fire extinguishers, but they should have fire points. There should be something to let the tenants know something's gone wrong. There was nothing. No alert, it was just on fire. And that's not good enough. Not in 2017.
The father missing from the 21st floor is a hospital porter in the NHS. His 3 children range from 20 down to just a few years old. There are so many people still unaccounted for. Chris's other relatives were lucky to escape, and this afternoon he helped them take some donated belongings to the hotel they'll sleep in tonight, paid for by the local authority. His brother-in-law was damning about the block's fire safety.
Everything is wrong there. No alarm, no that shower water when the fire, no security, no. It's health and safety hazard over there.
So last night, when did you know there was a fire? What happened?
Around 2 o'clock, I just smelled that plastic burn. I wake up, go to the kitchen, and say maybe someone left something in the kitchen, the cooker. So I go in the kitchen, then light the light, and I saw flames just behind the windows. And I thought, that is wrong, 9th floor flames. So I open the window, then all the smoke, and so I said, it's serious. Go to my wife, I told her, look, wake up, it's a fire. We wake up, we take the children, and you go straight away out.
Mr. Chebiunis lived in the block for 19 years. He too spoke to their missing relative as the fire spread last night.
We talked to him in the beginning. We talked to him. He said, Aziz, get out, get out, get out. He said, okay. Then he said, no, I can't. Someone told me to stay. It's safe. It's more safer than go out.
Chris ferried the homeless family off to get some sleep.
On social media.
But this evening, on his return, dreadful rumours started appearing online.
The little cousin opened his phone, looked at it on social media. It said, rest in peace, blah, blah, blah. And it was the family. So I said to him, what does that mean? He says, oh, you know, someone said it, I said, but have they got any evidence? Have they actually seen the person themselves or done something? Because if you haven't seen or done anything, it's a bit premature to send out a message like that. But, you know, he rang them back and says, no, that's what we've been hearing. So, unofficially, they've said that the family's dead. All of them are dead. However, we like to make sure we're right. And the only time I see it's right is when I can actually look at a body. Otherwise, I'm not going to recognise anything. And I suppose that's when I start to mourn.
Chris talking to Katie Razzle there, and for every tale of tragedy, and there may be many in the days ahead, there are occasional stories with happy endings. One came through just a few moments ago, a 13-year-old girl missing, presumed dead. Her parents had left her alone in the apartment as they worked on a night shift overnight, has just been reported alive and well, rescued by a neighbour. Evan, back to you.
Emily, thank you very much. Well, let's spend the rest of the programme thinking about the root causes and some of the misfortunes and mistakes that are made that might lead to these things. Fires will happen, obviously, and in tall buildings without sprinkler systems, the idea is they should be contained in a smallish portion of the structure. That is absolutely key. For residents, the advice is to stay put in their flats where they're behind fire-resistant doors. And then the fire brigade can get the contained fire out and remove the people within, say, an hour or so. That's the plan. In this case, the fire was not contained. It ripped through the building, which meant the generic advice to residents to stay put was not necessarily the right advice at all. So it all comes down to, why did the fire let rip? The building cladding is an issue here. It has been in other fires, and we've ascertained that a less fire-retardant form of cladding was used in the renovation in this case. Chris Cook looks at some of the early evidence of what happened.
Oh my God, they're screaming! How can we begin to understand the scale of the disaster that began in the early hours of this morning? What went wrong, and might it happen again? First, it's worth knowing that buildings like this are designed to contain fires. The idea is that if a fire breaks out, the fire brigade will have the time to combat it before it spreads. That's why the building had a so-called stay-put policy. People were supposed to stay in their flats until the fire was dealt with.
In this case, the tragic situation seems to be that the stay-put strategy that was in place, in fact, has led to people being in the building as smoke and flames penetrated right the way through the property. The normal strategy there is that, particularly with a tall building, then some people may be less able than others to be able to escape down staircases through, say, 20, 24 stories of a building. And therefore, stay put is a recognised strategy where people may be less able, in a way, to rapidly escape down a staircase.
The issue is that the fire did not stay contained. It raced through the building. So that stay-put system broke down. And the critical question is why? The prime candidate for allowing the fire to spread is the so-called cladding, the insulation applied to the exterior of the building. This was added recently, in 2015.
I think the attention on the cladding is because we've seen in the reports and the photographs burning exterior of the building, and we've seen enormous areas where the exterior is destroyed. Of course, the system that we've used, and we use widely in this country, and it's an accepted system, is an aluminium composite panel system. And that system effectively is it's a thin panel, so it's probably 6 millimeters thick or so. And typically, it's made of 2 sheets of aluminium with a core in between. And that core is critical as to what it's made of. Because if we look at some of the fires elsewhere around the world, and look at some of the fires in China or the Middle East, for example, that have been quite devastating, the core frequently has been a combustible type of plastic material.
Newsnight has learned that the specific cladding in use in Kensington was a product called Rhenobond. And in fact, there are 2 different versions of the cladding. The first is very fireproof. The second, which has a polyethylene core, is a bit less fireproof. And we've established it's the second, less fireproof version of the cladding that they used. There have been questions about polyethylene core cladding from abroad. For example, following fires like this one in Dubai. Watch this polyethylene fire from France in 2012. It starts small, then quickly jumps up floors via the outside of the building, and within minutes, it's racing up the exterior. But the contractors who fitted the cladding in Kensington insist that their materials and work met the required standards. All modern British cladding is supposed to be of limited combustibility. Whether our fire regulation is in the right place, though, has been an open question since a smaller disaster in London in 2009. 6 people died in the Lakanal House fire. Since then, though, not much has happened.
That led to a very, very detailed coroner's inquest and report. And part of that, they said that there should be a review of Part B of the regulations which govern high-rise buildings.
That's the fire regulations?
There's fire regulations, which hasn't yet been done. In October of this year, then Housing Minister Gavin Barwell said that it would be, but the sector's still waiting for that. And it was only in March this year, I think, members of the all-party parliamentary group on fire safety were warning that lives would be at risk if it wasn't.
The Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, which owns the building, has big questions to answer. The government's response to Lakanal House deserves probing too. We really need answers to make sure that other places don't suffer as Kensington has.
Chris Cook there. Well, Theresa May says lessons will be learned and actions taken, but there was that fatal fire in Camberwell in 2009, and some have drawn comparisons between that and this. Jeremy Corbyn made reference to it in his response today.
A review took place after the fire in Camberwell, and the government has that review. I believe we need to ask questions about what facilities and resources have been given to every local authority that has tower blocks within the area, and frankly, most do. We need to deal with this. We need people to be safe living in high-rise buildings.
Well, Sir David Amos is the Conservative MP for Southend West and chair of the All-Parliamentary Fire Safety and Rescue Group, which commissioned one of the reports that was into that earlier fire you heard Mr Corbyn talking about. And Matt Tarak is the General Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union. Thank you both for coming in. Were lessons learned after the Camberwell fire?
Just want to say immediately there are no adequate words to express my sorrow for the families affected, and it's very frustrating that we're not being wise after the event. Our voice is now being heard once there's been a disaster. We have said over and over again, sprinklers stop lives being lost. And in 2013, the coroner, after the Lacanau disaster, recommended that sprinklers in these 4,000 old tower blocks could be fitted. And that's what we've been asking for all along. And we've also asked for a review of building regulations. We've been waiting 11 years.
Right. And what response have you had? Have you been stonewalled, or you've been told it's too expensive?
Well, it's all there in Hansard.
It's just, well, we want to do it, and yes, maybe we'll have another commission.
I mean, this farce shouldn't have happened, and I just do not understand.
So who are you blaming, David? Because that sounds like a central government policy decision.
In the anger and bitterness that everyone's feeling tonight, I'm not blaming anyone.
Right.
I'm just very frustrated that we're not wise after the event, that our all-party parliamentary group had pointed out to Parliament consistently that these things should be acted on. So, for instance, it's crazy that all new school buildings, as a matter of course, do not have sprinklers immediately fitted. You can't put a price on any person's life. That's the bottom line.
Right. Matt Rack, what have you taken out of this? The cladding issue? The sprinkler issue? I mean, where would you cut it?
Well, again, if I may firstly, just on behalf of firefighters across the UK, say how horrifying this incident is, and our thoughts are with the residents and particularly those who are bereaved tonight. It sounds like that is going to get worse. And also to pay tribute to the firefighters and emergency service workers who have undoubtedly saved lives. I mean, the starting point is that there needs to be an absolutely thorough investigation. The truth is, this should not be happening in the UK, one of the wealthiest countries in the world.
We've known how not to have it happen.
Indeed, and after Lacanau House, we provided support to the central government's fire and rescue advisor. We provided technical support from our own fire safety experts, and clearly, actually, action hasn't been taken as a result of that incident. So, very serious questions have to be examined.
Did either of you know that polyethylene, which is a flammable or partly flammable material, was being used in cladding for buildings in current renovations or very recent renovations?
Well, I certainly
and was creating this chimney effect that means when you get a small fire, it just races up the entire...
Crazy.
Those pictures from France are crazy.
I woke up this morning to see that. I've attended fires in tower blocks before. I've never seen anything like that in the UK. And I think that's what will have shocked firefighters, to see the whole building engulfed as it was last night.
Matt, what about this stay put advice? Because that's always been the advice in a tall building: stay put. You've got a fire-resistant door. It wasn't the right advice.
Well,
on this occasion,
I think the advice, and even on the clip there, was if your own flat is not affected. The logic of construction of tower blocks is to compartmentalize the fire.
Indeed.
So a fire should be restricted to the flat or floor of origin. There should be smoke-resistant, smoke-safe doors on every floor, so that that residents can firstly get out if they need to. Secondly, that firefighters can enter the building, put water in the bottom, get water out at the top, and put out the fire in the flat. That's the whole logic. But if during the course of renovations, I'm not saying this has happened because we don't know, if during the course of renovations, then fire-resistant walls, doors, ceilings, etc. have been compromised, then clearly the whole basis on which that advice is based falls apart. That's why the advice is there. In this incident, clearly it wasn't adequate for those people.
David, someone's heads have got to roll over this, haven't they? And who's it going to be? Because it sounds like it's people much higher up than fire chiefs or council chiefs. It sounds like it's policy decisions. You serve in Parliament.
Today is the wrong day for those, and of course, every instant there's someone to blame. But I hope the new minister, Nick Hurd, will immediately tell all local authorities, all housing associations who have tower blocks in their stock to do an immediate review of their fire safety precautions. Forget Parliament convening. That's got to be done immediately, and I hope now that our all-party parliamentary group's advice will be acted on.
Matt, buildings renovated with polyethylene cladding, tall buildings, we can't deem them to be safe, can we, at this point? There are probably quite a few of them around.
There may well. We don't know the scale of that. We've had that's the problem about Lakenhall House. We had an incident where 6 people died, where again the building's fire protection had been compromised by alterations. Firefighters couldn't do their job in that situation. A coroner recommended action was taken. Action hasn't been taken, and people living in those blocks have the right now to ask that those questions are answered. The point is, and I'll finish, is this should not be happening. That's the horrible aspect to this event.
Thank you both very much indeed. Well, what does all this say about Britain today? A building with a population the size of a village completely destroyed. Now, of course, building regulations are not discriminatory. They're not more lax for the poor than the rich. But are they up to the job? Was renovation work done on the cheap? Were there budget constraints in housing departments? And was the management structure right? The building was run by a so-called TMO, a tenant management organisation. In this case, it was the Kensington and Chelsea one. And these are companies that look after council housing on contract. They were created with the purported aim of giving residents power over what happens on their estates. But the Grenfell Action Group, as we heard earlier, had been scathing about this TMO. And that all speaks to the way the country's run. Remember, too, that we live in an era of undocumented workers, casual housing arrangements, friends sleeping on floors and sofas because it's too expensive to find a place to live. That may add poignancy to the story of the dead and missing. Well, we can discuss all of this. I'm joined by Times writer David Aronovich, Sean Bailey, Conservative member of the London Assembly, and Anna Minton, an academic who writes about housing and public space. And a very good evening to you all. Anna, some have said this is a Hurricane Katrina-like moment.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's an iconic moment for British housing in a very similar way, I think, to Ronan Point in 1968, which collapsed, killing, I think, 4 people. And that signalled the end of mass system building and all the problems that had brought with it. It was the end of that era of tower block building. This is another symbolic moment, but actually this signals, I think, the end of a lack of accountability, because it's that lack of accountability that we've seen here, where residents' concerns, repeated warnings they've failed to, the tenants management organisation has failed to listen to them again and again. And just one key point to mention here, this isn't a tenants management organisation, it's what's called an ALMO. It's an arm's length management organisation, which is in fact a different sort of private company.
But it's a non-profit making company that is designed to help the residents of council stock in Kensington.
It's an unaccountable quango.
But it has elected residents as majority of the board, doesn't it?
It manages the 10,000 social housing properties in the borough. It has, I believe, half of the board members are residents of the borough, so the rest of them are a mixture of council.
Residents of the borough or residents of the council housing?
I believe that they're residents from those 10,000 homes.
Right, yes.
So we have a handful of residents from those 10,000 homes on that board. But it is quite clear, I mean, your report made it abundantly clear that that board has repeatedly failed to respond
we'll
to
let them answer that when they have collected themselves to do that. Sean Bailey, do you think this plays to an issue around power accountability? Is that the underlying story of this ghastly fire?
I think for me the underlying story is firstly the local people. I come from that area. My mum lives very close by. I've spoken to people there and there's a lot of terror because close to Grenfell Towers, 2 other blocks of very similar vintage. And now there's people sat in those blocks. And
have they been renovated as well?
I'm not sure, but there's certainly people worried. I spoke to someone who lives in one of the blocks and he is terrified. He said, well, if it happened to them, why couldn't it happen to us? The key thing is, was it the regulations that went wrong, or was there some negligence around how the block is managed? They are 2 very different things, and that's what an investigation will need to look at. And for me, Almo, however a building's run, we need to be able to see an audit of their fire risk assessments so that they can be held to account by an outside body. This is very important, because once we get past the pain of this so tragic incident, we're going to have to look at how do we prevent it again. And one of the key things is who manages and how they manage, and currently that hasn't been answered properly.
Right, I'm going to come to David, but Anna, there's a very specific problem that may well just account for a lot of this, which is a cladding problem. It's probably not what the tenants were complaining about. They probably didn't know that this cladding was polyethylene or whatever else. I mean, they may have been aware of that, but if it just turns out to be that, why would you then focus on accountability issues and power issues and all these things, as opposed to there's a problem with the building regs?
Well,
and
I mean, what
I've
heard is that the Tenants Management Organisation received 8 complaints of fire risk in recent years from that tower and other towers in the borough. So, you know, it's quite clear that there are much wider issues there.
Let me bring you in, David. I mean, what do you think about the argument that this speaks to a kind of dysfunctional relationship between the rich and the rest, and the many and the few, and all these issues we've been talking about?
This is, as David Amos said, 2017. And we should be so ashamed that this has happened in our capital city, a disaster of this scale. Now, what will happen, as happened with the big disasters in the 80s, the Marchioness, the Bradford fire, Hillsborough and so on, is that we will discover that the causes of this fire, like the causes there, were things that were pretty easily known about and could properly, with a fair bit of money and foresight and attention, been dealt with. Now, one of the big problems we've had a kind of assault on the idea of the cost and attention that is required from health and safety legislation and from health and safety practice. This is not, I mean, whether this is or not, this is a matter about poor people, rich people, is a matter we could come to. We could imagine that there are mansion blocks, old mansion blocks, which are equally unfitted with sprinklers and which equally might go up, but where actually complaints probably would be better heard. But we do not need to have disasters to be able to build preventative strategies into our mindset. We don't need it. We just need to spend the money and pay the attention.
Right. But that's why who's on the board is important. I've been on many tenant management organisations. I lived in similar blocks. And the problem is, if you put a lot of tenants on, it looks good, but what are you doing about the level of expertise? Because I wouldn't have known which type of cladding. I wouldn't have known if it's a risk or not. It may not have been, who knows? But you can't just build a board and do the cosmetic thing. You have to give people access to information that they can use to empower them.
You're right, of course. But we know that, for instance, external cladding was responsible for this fire at this large Dubai hotel, which everybody saw on YouTube and so on in on New Year's Day 2016. Now, if it is true that outside cladding can compromise every single major factor that is required for safety in our tower blocks, it is beyond comprehension why this would not be known and be acted upon.
But I mean, if the APPG's recommendations
the old party parliamentary
had been followed, and if there had been a review of regulations, and if we took regulation seriously, then that cladding would probably never have got through.
I mean, we're not very good at low probability events that are probably not going to happen to us. I mean, it's a sort of human failing, that sort of... I'm not going to worry about it, it's low on my list. But we do have people, as it happens in our country, who worry an awful lot about fire. We have fire briefings at the beginning of every meeting in a hotel. Someone will say these are where the exits
I mean, can I just say...
We've thought about this stuff. And so David's criticism is really interesting. How come we didn't know that, you know, cladding was a terrible risk and you needed sprinklers if you were going to have cladding?
Well, I mean, there's the cladding issue, which I think speaks directly to regulation, but this was not a low probability event. There were 8 repeated warnings. Thousands of tenants knew that this was going to happen. They wrote about it.
And the key thing here is the mixed information. Do you stay? Do you go? Somebody needs to be clear about that information, because that would have saved lives. We don't know if that was wrong or right, but we need a deep investigation by both the fire brigade and the police, because I know tonight there's tenants wondering, if this happened in my block, what would I do? And they're the questions that we need to answer.
All disasters are low probability events. The King's Cross fire had never happened before the King's Cross fire happened, but when it did happen, it was absolutely obvious that at some point or other it would, and if it did, it would happen with those kinds of consequences.
Don't think the big accountability issue of how you give people in and positions of responsibility, incentives to make sure they're thinking about these things and taking the requisite precautions and spending the right amounts of money. And how do we do that? Because it's very hard to say that's the bod who was, who made the decision that was entirely responsible for it. Often it's just a non-decision rather than a decision, or it was a decision to think about it a little bit longer rather than a decision to do it straight away. What do we do? Do we want a culture which finds a culprit and says they're to blame and scares the wits off other administrators to make sure they don't get caught?
But I mean, when you have non-accountable quangos in charge who are not democratically elected, who are not going to be answerable, you're opening the door to this sort of thing.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about the people who set building regulations, who set budgets, who make decisions about do we put sprinkler systems in tall buildings retrofitted or do we leave
accountability? You're right, Ivan. Accountability is only one issue because of the point that Sean made, which is that the people who you might be accountable to don't necessarily know what the problems will be. So what you have to build in is a culture of prevention at almost all costs. That's the point. You have to spend the money. And not only that, but you have to stop complaining about the health and safety culture when you've got it. You have to prioritise it and say, yes, this is a very important thing. And yes, it might be slightly difficult for us. And yes, it may have us doing things that we don't quite like all the time. But actually, it's a fairly essential part of seeing this kind of thing not happening.
It's about mitigating the risk. Obviously, you can't do 100% of mitigation, but there is definitely something glaringly wrong here. And although this might be a low probability event, fire is not. And we understand what starts fires and how we can fight fires. The London Fire Brigade has been very successful at reducing the level of fire. But this is a very particular thing that is scaring London. Again, there's many buildings of this vintage in London. Somebody needs to look at how we empower residents to look after themselves and the building, because that's the thing that will mainly save lives. If those residents were confident about the state of that building or what to do, a lot more people would have been alive tonight.
I mean, I don't think it's about empowering residents. It's about the fact that we've had a government that does not believe in regulation.
We need to leave it there. Thank you all very much on a very sad day. Well, that's it from us. For obvious reasons, we've not even mentioned the resignation of Tim Farron. He stepped down as leader of the Lib Dems, referring to the struggle of reconciling his Christianity and his leadership of a progressive party. We couldn't do justice to the politics or the principles of that today, so we'll try to get back to it tomorrow. And I'm sure the repercussions of this fire, as we learn more about its causes and consequences, will also be preoccupying us. Until tomorrow, good night.
Good evening. After a fairly muggy night tonight, slightly fresher air on the way tomorrow. It's this